Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Jessica's Library Card. I am Jessica, and if you have not been here before, welcome. Today I am going to be going through my top 10 books of 2023. It took me forever to decide on these books, and I did put them in order from my number 10 favorite book of the year all the way down to my favorite book. And I thought it would be fun if for each of these books I gave you a quote so that you could get just a little taste of what the language is like inside them. So this isn't a 45-minute long video. Let's go ahead and get started with number 10, which is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This book is a novella. It's not super long. It was the winner of the Hugo Award for Best Novella in 2023. And that's the reason why I picked it up. I haven't heard a lot about it. I haven't seen a lot of people reading it. And I think that that needs to change because it definitely was my most surprising read of 2023. I don't think of myself as somebody who loves a novella, but here we are. I found that this book was exactly as long as it needed to be to tell the story that it was trying to tell. We follow Helen Brandt in the 1940s. She is the kind of hard-boiled mystical detective in this alternate version of 1940s Chicago, in which magic is real. There are demons, there are angels, and she has been hired to do a really simple job, she thinks, which, of course, as we all know, turns out to be a lot more than she expected. More than just a mystery, Even Though I Knew the End is a love story. Helen is in an established relationship with Edith, and I have to tell you that I would die for them to be happy. Sometimes an established relationship is a little bit boring to read about in a book, but there was something about Helen and Edith that was perfect. Edith is the kind of girl who still goes to church every week, something that has a lot of bearing on the story, which has to do with a battle between secret magical societies, angels, demons, right, wrong, good, evil. It had so much in under 200 pages. I would definitely recommend that if you have not heard of this book, if you like fantasy, if you like hard-boiled detective stories, because she calls everyone that she can in this book doll, then I definitely would recommend this book to you. And let me see, I have a quote from this book for you today. And this quote is about the relationship between Helen and Edith. The bed springs sang, and Edith did too, because she was always a bit like music. Oh, so romantic. Love it. Definitely check that one out. Number 9 on my list of best books of the year is The Last Cuentista by Donna Barba Higuera. This book won the Newbery Award in 2022. And I haven't seen a lot of people who I follow reading this book, and I think that if you are a fan of science fiction or other speculative fiction, if you're a fan of books that talk about story and the reason why story is so important to us, you owe it to yourself to read The Last Cuentista. We follow a girl named Petra. Petra loves her abuelita, and she would like to follow in her footsteps and become a cuentista, which means storyteller. But then it turns out that an asteroid is coming for the Earth, and the Earth is going to be destroyed. You have a small group of people who are going to be on these generation ships where they're going to be placed into stasis until they reach a planet where hopefully they'll be able to restart the human race. Petra and her parents and her brother are all part of one of these ships. But of course, it wouldn't be a book without something going wrong. And when Petra comes out of stasis, it's not at all what she expects. She's the only person who can remember what it was like on Earth. This book is about the importance of stories in a culture. It's about who we are if we no longer have a memory of our past. Even if you don't ordinarily read middle grade books, I think it's worth it to pick this one up. It was a beautiful story. It was moving. The language is amazing. You need to read this book. My quote for this one is, I know stories can't always have happy endings, but if there are chances for us to do better, we have to say out loud the parts that hurt the most. My number 8 book for 2023 is The Wager by David Grann. And I have to tell you, I was so surprised by the fact that I loved this book. I am not a nonfiction person. I am not a history person. I didn't know that I cared so much about the history of ships and exactly how terrible it is for you to get scurvy. But apparently, I do. So this book tells a real story about a voyage in the 1700s that ended terribly. Everyone has decided the ship is lost at sea, and then a boat with these 30 sailors appears. And they're telling a story of how they managed to survive against all the odds when everything went wrong. A few months later, another group of survivors washes up on shore and talks about the mutiny that led them there, leading people to feel that the first ones were not entirely being truthful. It was just so compelling hearing about this story and learning about the way ships worked. I had no idea that being on a ship was as terrible as I think it was. The author really does a good job making you feel like you are there. You don't feel like you're just learning history or you're just reading about something that happened. You really care about what is going to happen to these people. If you think you might be interested in this book, I would recommend giving it a try. And I do have a quote. "Empires preserve their power with the stories that they tell, but just as critical are the stories that they don't. The dark silences they impose. The pages they tear out." Number 7 on my list is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I picked up Swordcatcher because I know it's her adult fantasy debut. I saw a few positive reviews and I thought, I could use a new series to get into. And I was so surprised by how much I loved this book. It's the story of Kell, and he is a swordcatcher. A swordcatcher is someone who pledges his life to protect the prince of this kingdom called Castellane. He sometimes stands in for the prince because they look a little bit alike. He is his bodyguard. He trains to be able to take care of the prince, whose name is Connor. Not only that, but he really cares about Connor. And Connor is a character who could be a little bit frustrating. He has been raised with a lot of privilege, and he doesn't always see the privilege that he has. But he's also fiercely loyal to Kell. And their relationship is very interesting, and it forms one of the central parts of this book. But it's also the story of a physician named Lynn. Lynn is a woman who has become a physician in a world that does not allow women to be physicians. She's also a part of an ethnic minority that is very much discriminated against within this society. And these two storylines don't intersect until about the middle of the book, and when they do, things start really happening. I thought the language in this book was beautiful. Cassandra Clare does a great job describing everything, the sights and the smells of this town, and you really feel like you are there. I would recommend this book to anyone who is a fan of fantasy, but maybe has a little bit of trouble getting into high fantasy sometimes, because this feels very much to me like a bridge between high fantasy and the more young adult style that she has been writing in for a long time. I do have a quote. "He kept his promises to Connor, but would break a promise to anyone else for Connor's sake in a heartbeat." Number 6 on my list is Starling House by Alex E. Haro. Now, I had previously read The 10,000 Doors of January, which was, I believe, her debut novel, which is a fantasy. And I had a really hard time getting into it. I thought the writing was beautiful, but I felt like there wasn't a lot of plot, and I need there to be some plot in a book for me to stay interested in it. But I saw some positive reviews of this one, and I saw that it was set in Kentucky. I am from Kentucky. I currently live in Kentucky. I was really curious to see what the author did with the setting of a small coal town. The setting is a town called Eden. Eden is a mining town in Kentucky that has been strip mined of a lot of its natural resources. The coal company very much controls a lot of what goes on in this town. It is based on the very real Muhlenberg County. And if you've ever heard the John Prine song Paradise, and if you haven't, you should go listen to it because it's great, then you'll know exactly how she was coming up with the setting for this book. Opal is our main character, and she is tough. She is an orphan, and she has dedicated her life to making sure that her younger brother has all of the opportunities that she was never able to have. She's been working dead-end jobs and saving as much money as she can to try to give him a better life. One day, as she's walking home from one of these jobs, she sees that the gates to this mysterious estate called Starling House are open to her, and naturally she goes inside. This book is loosely set on Beauty and the Beast. Loosely. There is a character, his name is Arthur, who is the love interest, who is based on the Beast, but the plotline, I would say, diverges from there quite a bit. I wouldn't go into it expecting a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Alex Harrow's writing is beautiful. The language is gorgeous. I loved this book. Here's my quote. "He looks like a boy who wanted to grow flowers, but was handed a sword instead. He looks like a man who gave up on hope a long time ago, but who keeps fighting anyway, on and on." Number 5 on my list is The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I did not think I would like this book. I picked up the first one on a whim. I had a few months in the middle of the year where I didn't really read anything because we bought a house and we moved, and I did not have time to pick up a book. So I picked up this book to kind of get myself back into reading, and suddenly it was 2 weeks later and I had read all 3 of these novels. It is a mafia story set in a world where Jade has magical powers. We meet the Call family. They are morally gray. They are people who do bad things that maybe you will root for, even though you know that you should not. This series is heartbreaking. You know that bad things are happening and that good things are not going to happen to the characters that you care about, but you can't stop reading. I don't like a mafia story. I don't like a crime story. These were some long books, but I still finished the whole thing. I devoured it. I read it so quickly, and I think that you would like it too. Here is my quote. "Expectations are a funny thing. When you're born with them, you resent them, fight against them. When you've never been given any, you feel the lack of them your whole life." Number 4 on my list is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. I am going to start with the quote from this book because I love the quote from this book so much that I couldn't wait until the end of my review to share it. "You are nobody's rainbow. You're nobody's princess. You're nobody's doorway but your own. And the only one who gets to tell you how your story ends is you." This is the first book in a very long series of novellas that I think she's still writing to this day. And it tells the story of what happens to children in books who tumble through magical doors. What happens to those children if they try to return to our world? What happens if they come back and they find that the world they left behind no longer fits them? In this book, we go to Eleanor West's home for wayward children. These children find a family. They find people who can understand what they've been through. I hate to spoil anything about this story, so I'm not going to tell too much. But if you love a found family, if you love a series of books that explores sensitive topics in a way that just makes you feel better, makes you feel like there's hope, then you need to read this book. This book is for anyone who has ever felt like they did not fit in. I've now read, I think, the first 3 books. I'm planning to finish the series whenever she's finished writing it. But this is an exceptional series of books. They are short. They're under 200 pages. They have already won the Hugo Award for Best Series, even though they're not finished yet. I don't know what else to say. You need to read this book. We've made it to the top 3 on my list. And number 3 is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. Guys, this book was not on my radar. It was not something that I was expecting to hit me as hard as it hit me. But more people need to be talking about this book on Booktube. We follow Silas. Silas is a transgender teenager in an alternate Victorian England. He only wants to be able to live his life as himself, but his society does not allow him to do this. He was born with violet eyes, and violet eyes in this world indicate that you are able to communicate with the spirit world. Also in this world, it's Victorian. Women don't have a lot of rights. If you are a woman, your job is to marry a rich man, if you have violet eyes, and bear him magical children. Because Silas is not down with this version of what other people want him to be, he is sent away to a school that will teach him how to be a proper young lady. Silas has wanted to be a doctor his entire life. His brother is a physician and he has studied, but he is not allowed to do that because of the role that society has decided he is allowed to accept. This book, guys, read the trigger warnings. It is classified as horror, I believe, and there is body horror, there is medical horror, there are things that you're going to want to know that you're going to be reading about before you go into the book. But I'm going to tell you, I don't like any of those things, and it was 100% worth it. This book moved me. I feel like it taught me things. I think that it needs to be so popular. So let's try to get the word out about this one. I have a quote. "We are the same species. We're all human. It's not that people cannot understand me. It's simply that most of them don't want to." Number 2 on my list is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I love this book. I am such a big fan of T. Kingfisher. This was the first one of her books that I read, and it quickly became one of my favorite things that I think I have ever read. The blurb for the book is amazing. It says, "This isn't the kind of fairy tale where the princess marries a prince. It's the one where she kills him." We follow Mara. She is the 3rd girl born into a royal family. Her 2 older sisters have both been married off to the same prince. The first one died under mysterious circumstances, and now Mara knows that the prince has been harming them. So she sets out on a quest to basically to kill the prince. And along the way, she meets an unlikely band of fellow questers, including a witch, a chicken that has a demon in him, a fairy godmother who can only curse, and a dog that is made entirely of bones. Bone Dog has got to be one of my favorite fictional dogs that has ever existed. He is made of bones, but he is all heart. I loved that Mara was an older heroine. You see a lot of fantasy novels that follow around an 18-year-old, and I love those too, but sometimes I really want someone who has a little bit more experience. Mara has been in a convent for most of her life. Her perspective is very different from that of a lot of the heroines that we see in these books. There is a romance. The romance does not center the book. The romance is unconventional, and I thought it was the perfect amount. I will say that the first 30% of this book is a little bit slow. I have heard that from a few different people that I told to read it, but you need to push through, because if you love a found family, this family will change your life. They are everything to me. I do have a quote, and my quote is naturally about Bone Dog. "The love of a bone dog," she thought, bending her head over the paw again. "All that I am worth these days." Then again, few humans were truly worth the love of a living dog. Some gifts you could never deserve. We have made it to number 1, my top book of the year, the book that I think you should read. And that book is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I am aware that this seems to be kind of a love it or hate it book, and I definitely fall into the love it camp. This book, I was intimidated by it. It's long, it's academic. I was not sure that it was going to be something that I was going to love, but once I started it, I could not put it down until I was done with the entire thing. We follow Robin. Robin is an orphan who is brought by a mysterious professor to England, where he studies so that he can attend the Royal Translation Academy at Oxford. In this alternate version of England, silver can be imbued with magical properties that enable it to do lots of different things. The entire society of Victorian England is essentially built on silver work. It's as though the Industrial Revolution never happened because it didn't have to. Instead, we had a silver revolution. These silver bars, the way that they work, is based on translation. It's based on the difference in words between one language and another language saying the same thing. Because of this, children who are bilingual, who have their native tongue something other than English, are better at creating the magic. And so we create a situation where we have these children or these young adults who are from countries that have been colonized by England, who are basically working against the countries where they are from. And that's the central conflict in this book. What do you do? How do you fight colonialism? Should you be a part of it? Should you fight? Should you just go with the flow? And Robin and his friends have very different ideas about the evils of colonialism, about how you should deal with that, what your strategy should be, what your place in the world should be. If you've earned this place at this academy that is such a big deal, should you give it up because it turns out that maybe everything going on there isn't right? The ending broke my heart. I loved all the characters, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough. If you think you love language, you love linguistics, you will definitely be interested in everything that R.F. Kuang put into this book. She clearly spent a lot of time researching and making sure that she understood the languages that she was going to be putting into this magic system. And here is my final quote. "This is how colonialism works. It convinces us that the fallout from resistance is entirely our fault, that the immoral choice is resistance itself rather than the circumstances that demanded it." Thank you for sticking around for my entire top 10 list. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope that you will subscribe and come back again for more content. And I would love to hear in the comments what you thought about the books that made it into my top 10 for 2023. Bye.